Janet started her morning by making her favorite tea, sitting on the veranda where the sun's rays flooded her small but cozy home. She loved these moments of quiet. But that day she received a call from the bank. "Mrs. a gardener, we're calling about your loan," said an official voice. Loan? Janet almost dropped her cup. It turned out that a $40,000 loan had been taken out in her name. It was all formalized, signed, and the documents were in order. Only she didn't know anything about it. "This must be a mistake," insisted Janet. Her heart was pounding like a bell. The operator kindly informed her that all the data matched: passport, address, even signature. "Could your husband have applied for this as a co-borrower?" the operator asked. Janet hung up the phone, her hands shaking. Only one thought was running through her minding: Frank. When Frank returned home, Janet met him at the door. "Frank, we have to have a serious talk." Her voice sounded firm, although inside she felt broken. Then Frank began to swing. "What happened?" "I don't know anything." But when she showed him the documents, his face changed. He began to nervously adjust his shirt collar. "It was for us," Frank finally said. "Anna, I wanted to take the money for a new investment. Everything was under control, but something went wrong." Janet stood there, stunned. Her own husband had used her name without saying a word. He had forged her signature. And in that moment, she felt everything they had built together begin to crumble. The trust they had built over decades was destroyed by one careless decision. "Frank," continued he, "this was an opportunity that could have changed our lives. I wanted you not to worry." But there was no remorse in those words, only an attempt to avoid responsibility. "You took out a $40,000 loan without my permission." Her voice broke. You forged my signature, you put me at risk of bankruptcy, and all behind my back." Frank lowered his head but couldn't find the words to respond. Left alone in the room, Janet decides to take action. She finds the number of the lawyer she had consulted a few years ago. Little does she know that this is only the beginning of her struggle. Janet stands by the window, looking out at her garden. Her eyes are filled with tears, but she promises herself, "I will not let him ruin my life." After a sleepless night, Janet sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, staring at the wall. Her thoughts were tangled like a ball of thread. How could this have happened? What made Frank, her life partner, commit such a betrayal? She knew she had to figure it out. But how? Talk to him again, or look for answers on her own? Janet remembered how a few months ago Frank started acting strangely. He was always talking about some big opportunity, avoiding the topic of finances, and his phone was constantly locked. She decided to give Frank a chance to explain. When he got home from work, she asked him to sit down to talk. Her voice was soft but firm. "Frank, I need to know the truth. What made you take out this loan without my knowledge?" At first, Frank remained silent. He nervously picked at his spoon, avoiding Janet's gaze. But then he said, "I just wanted to provide for us. It was an idea that could work. I thought you wouldn't understand." "Don't understand." Janet raised her voice. "You decided to risk our future, our money, and you didn't even tell me. How am I supposed to understand that?" Frank looked confused. "I did it for us," he kept saying, but he sounded hollow. As we talked, it became clear that Frank had been in debt since he tried to start his own business 10 years ago. He had never told Janet about it, hoping that he could solve it himself. But this time, with a new idea, he lacked the startup capital. "I thought that if everything went according to plan, we would live better than ever," he said, lowering his head. After this conversation, Janet was left alone in the bedroom. She thought back to their years together. Frank had always been a dreamer, always wanted more than they had. But was it concern for his family or selfishness? Her heart was torn between compassion and anger. On the one hand, she saw a man who was afraid to admit his mistakes. Or on the other hand, he had put her in such a terrible position without asking her opinion. The next day, Jeanette with her best friend, Lori. She knew that Lori could help her put things in perspective. Maybe he just didn't want to worry you," Lori suggested. "Not worry," Janet laughed bitterly. "He made me worry more than ever." Lori advised her to be careful and not to make any hasty decisions. But you have to get the whole truth," she said. Janet decided to review all the financial documents. She found the statements that Frank had been hiding. It turned out that the money had already been spent on some risky project, and she didn't know the details yet, but she realized that things were worse than she thought. Janet looked at the stack of papers in front of her. Her eyes were full of tears, but they were filled with determination. She would not wait passively any longer. She needed to find out everything, even if it meant destroying whatever was left of their marriage. "What else are you hiding from me, Frank?" Janet's voice was trembling, but she looked him straight in the eye. Frank was silent, as if his speech had suddenly lost its power. After their intense conversation, Janet decided to dig deeper. She took up the documents she had found in Frank's drawer again. Among them were old bank statements, strange contracts, and even letters from creditors. One of the letters referred to a $10,000 debt that was supposed to be paid off 3 years ago. "What kind of debt is this?" she thought. But that was only the beginning, and after many hours of poring over the documents, Janet realized that Frank's total debts far exceeded her expectations. He had taken out loans in her name more than once, and a part of the money went to pay off old debts, and the rest went to risky investments that didn't bring any profit. Her hands shook as she opened the laptop again to check their joint account. There were only pennies left in it. To find out more, Janet decided to call one of the creditors whose contact she had found in the documents. "I'm Frank Johnson's wife," she began. "I want to know why we're getting your letters. Mrs. Johnson, your husband owes us a substantial amount of money. We have tried several times to contact him, but he has not responded." The voice on the other end of the line replied. Janet was almost speechless. It turned out that Frank had also pawned their car and tried several times to get additional loans against their home. Janet shared the news with Lori, who could not believe her ears. "This isn't just stupid," Lori said. "This is a real scam. He's ruined your life, Janet." Lori suggested that she contact a lawyer to see what steps she could take, but Janet was hesitant. How could she do this to the man she loved? That evening, Janet made Frank sit down at the table and talk. "I know about all your debts," she said coldly. "Now you will tell me everything you have been hiding, or I will go to the police." Frank started to speak, but his words were fragmented. He admitted that he had tried to save their financial situation, but the situation had gotten out of hand. "I wanted us to have more than we had," he said, "but then I realized I had trapped myself. I didn't know how to tell you." But even after this conversation, Janet realized that Frank was still hiding something. His behavior was too nervous, and his words too superficial. Her determination to find the whole truth only strengthened. Now she had to not only save herself, but also realize how far her husband had gone. "You're destroying everything we've built together." Janet's voice rose as Frank sat clenching his fists and avoiding her gaze. But this time she would not let him keep quiet. After discovering the hidden depths and lies, Janet decided that she would not remain silent any longer. She gathered all the documents she could find, laid them out on the kitchen table, and waited for Frank to come home. Her heart was beating faster than usual, but she felt determined. Frank came into the house, obviously tired, and threw his briefcase on a chair. "I need to talk to you," Janet began, her voice steady, but the tremor in it hard to hide. "More of this." He muttered, sighing. "I just got off work. This is more important than your work," she replied firmly and pointed to the papers on the table. When Frank saw the papers, his face turned white. "Where did you get this?" He asked, grabbing the documents and trying to crumple them. "That's not important," Janet said, grabbing his arm. "What's important is that you kept it from me. We have no money, Frank. You've put us in a debt hole, and I want to know why." Frank rose from the table as if to leave, but Janet blocked his path. "I did it for us!" he exclaimed, waving his arms. "I tried to fix it, but it didn't work." You think it's easy for me. Do you know how much pressure I'm under? For our sake," she asked again with a bitter laugh. "You didn't even think to tell me." This isn't for us, it's for you. You've always thought only of yourself. Her words seemed to hit him, but he quickly returned to his defense. You don't understand anything. I had a plan, but you always put a spoke in my wheel. The conversation turned into a scream. Janet could no longer hold back her tears, and Frank began to pace back and forth across the room, avoiding her gaze. You took out a loan in my name without even asking me. That's criminal, Frank, she exclaimed. Do you have any idea how I felt? He shouted back. All these years I've been trying to be better for you, for us, and all you do is criticize me. His voice began to break, and Janet saw in his eyes not only anger but also fear. But that wouldn't stop her. Frank suddenly collapsed into a chair, covering his face with his hands. I don't know what to do, he whispered. I can't fix this. Everything is ruined. These words confused Janet. For the first time in a long time, she saw something real in him, but her anger did not disappear. You have to fix this, she said, trying to hold back her tears, or I will do it myself. Janet decided to contact a lawyer. But what about Frank? Could she trust him after everything that had happened? Or was this the last chance for their marriage? How could I not have seen this coming before? Janet thought as she held the phone with the lawyer's number on it. But now it's time to act. The next morning, after a tumultuous night, Janet decided that she would no longer let the situation rule her life. She pulled out her phone book and began looking for the number of the lawyer she had heard about from a friend. Hello, is this the office of Michael Brooks? She asked, trying to sound confident, even though her voice was shaking. Yes, how may I help you? The calm voice on the other end replied. Janet explained her situation. The receptionist asked her to come in for a consultation, and they made an appointment for the next day. Before the meeting, Janet decided to ask her best friend Linda for advice. They met at a cafe, where Janet immediately spilled the beans. You have to fight, Linda said firmly, squeezing Janet's hand. It's not just about the money. This is about the way he treated you. If you don't protect yourself now, it will continue. Linda's words gave her determination, but they also made her afraid. Was she really ready to fight? Michael Brooks' office was small but cozy, and certificates hung on the walls and a frame with a photo of his family stood on the desk. This gave Janet a little confidence. Tell me everything from the beginning, the lawyer asked, listening carefully to her story. Janet described in detail the loan, the hidden debts, and Frank's emotional outburst. She even showed the documents she could find. It's a complicated situation, Michael said, flipping through the papers, but there are ways to proceed. We can try to challenge the loan if we can prove that you didn't sign the agreement knowingly. These words gave Janet a ray of hope, but Michael warned her that it could be a long and tedious process. After meeting with the lawyer, Janet decided to talk to her brother Tom. He had always been her support, but their relationship hadn't been so close lately. Why didn't you come to me earlier? Tom was surprised to hear her story. I was embarrassed, she admitted, and I didn't know if I could trust you. We're family, Jeanette, Tom said firmly, and I'm not going to let you be left alone in this situation. His support was what she needed. For the first time in a long time, she felt that she was not alone. It seemed like things were starting to change for the better. But little did Janet know that she was about to make an unexpected discovery that could change everything. Efavada had to decide whether to forgive and stay or let go and start over. It was the hardest choice of my life. After days of reflection and sleepless nights, Janet invited Frank for one last conversation. As she prepared herself, knowing that this moment would be crucial in their relationship. Frank, she began, looking him straight in the eye. I want to understand why you did this to me. We've been together for so many years. Didn't I deserve honesty? Frank lowered his head. His voice trembled as he answered, I didn't know how else to save us. I thought I could do it alone and you would never know. I was just afraid of losing you. His words seemed sincere, but Janet knew they could not erase the pain and betrayal. I forgave you in my mind, she said, but forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean we can stay together. Agaha, Frank to convince Herg. Janet, we can fix this. I'll do anything to earn your trust back. She shook her head. It's not just about trust. It's about who we've become. And I can no longer be someone who lives in fear and uncertainty. That night, Janet realized that her decision was not just about Frank. It was a choice between her old life, full of pain, and a new beginning, however difficult. Ashley decided to leave the house and move in with her brother Tom for a while. This decision was not easy for her, but it was the first step towards freedom. Her family and friends became her real support. Linda helped her find a psychologist who helped Janet cope with her emotions. Tom supported her in all legal matters. "You're stronger than you think," he said one evening, "and I'm proud of the way you're holding up." Well, those words were a real boost for Janet. A few months later, Janet received a court decision that allowed her to dispute the loan. It was her small victory in the fight for justice. She found a small house in the suburbs and started volunteering at a support center for women. "I can't change the past," she said at one of the meetings, "but I can do everything I can to change my future. Sometimes when a door closes, life opens a window for you. But can you find the strength to look through it?" Several months have passed since Janet left Frank. After all the legal battles and emotional chaos, she felt it was time to focus on herself. She had the support of Linda, her best friend, who one day came up with an unexpected idea. "Janet, you've always loved to draw. Why don't you try to resume this hobby?" At first, Janet just brushed it off. It's just a fun thing that no one needs. But Linda persisted. "You deserve to find joy in your life again. This could be your chance." One morning, sitting in her new small home, Janet pulled out a box of paints that had been gathering dust in the attic for years. She started painting just for herself, abstract patterns, still lifes, and then portraits of people she met. The process became a kind of therapy for her. Each brush stroke washed away the pain and disappointment that had accumulated over the years. One day, Linda saw several of Janet's paintings and posted them on social media. The post suddenly received hundreds of likes and comments. The people admired the works. Some even asked if they could buy a painting. "Janet," Linda said, showing the phone screen, "this is your chance!" At first, Janet was hesitant. She didn't believe that her hobby could turn into something more. But after much thought, she decided to take the plunge. She organized a small exhibition at the local library. To Janet's surprise, almost all the paintings were sold on the first day. One of the buyers even offered to commission a portrait of his family. Never thought I'd be able to make money doing what I love," she told Linda after the exhibition. Through art, Janet began to meet people who shared her interests. She felt the world opening up to her again. One day at a workshop, she met a woman named Mary, who had also gone through a difficult breakup. "Your work has a soul," Mary said. "It inspires me." These words gave Janet confidence that she was moving in the right direction. Janet began to think about opening her own gallery, where she could not only exhibit her work but also support other emerging artists. "It's not just about me," she explained to Linda. "I want people who have been through hard times to see that there is always a way forward." Janet has made her choice. She has chosen a life full of meaning and new opportunities. But will her path of art be the beginning of true happiness? When everything is falling apart, is it possible to build something new out of the rubble? A few months have passed since Janet made the most difficult decision of her life, to leave Frank and start from scratch. She continued to live in a small rented house, which became a symbol of freedom and the beginning of a new chapter for her. Every day brought new challenges, but also new discoveries. She began to spend more time on herself, walking in the fresh air, reading books she had been putting off for years, and taking art classes. "This is just the beginning," she told herself as she looked in the mirror. "But I can do it." One evening, as Janet was preparing dinner, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. "Jeanette, it's me, Frank." His voice was quiet and uncertain. He said that it was difficult for him to live with the realization that he had ruined their life together. He asked for a meeting. I need to understand what you're feeling," he said. "I know I've hurt you, but maybe we can start over." Janet was silent for a few seconds before answering. "Frank, I don't know if I'm ready to go back to the past. But I can listen to you." At the meeting, Janet did not see the confident man he used to be, but a man who looked confused and tired. He admitted that his actions were motivated by fear and despair. I realize that's no excuse," he said, "but I want to find a way to make it up to you." Janet listened to him, but in her heart she felt that their paths had already diverged. After the meeting, Janet shared her thoughts with Linda, who became her closest friend during these difficult times. "You don't have to go back to what destroyed you," Linda said. "You have the right to choose yourself." That evening, Janet to an exhibition of local artists, where she met Luke, a man who had also been through a difficult relationship. Their conversation was light, but full of understanding and compassion. Every day, Janet felt more and more that her life was filled with new meanings. She started volunteering at a local center for women in difficult situations. "I thought, if I can help at least one person," she thought, "then my experience was not in vain." Janet's life was not perfect, but she learned to appreciate every moment. Her story did not have a clear ending point, it just opened a new page.